Well, the national championship is right around the corner, and we got some big things planned for that. But we're going to be talking about a couple of other things because most teams, all but two teams, have already started their offseason, and there are some major offseason questions with some bigger programs. The other day, we hashed out Penn State. We got a little bit more on the Penn State and Nittany Lions for you Big Ten fans and football fans everywhere. Penn State and Nittany Lion fans, you're certainly included in that as well. But you Georgia fans get the primary of the target today because we're going to discuss the Georgia offense going forward, whether or not they need an elite quarterback to win championships, and we're also going to further break down the national championship based on the comments that were made by head coach Marcus Freeman. We're also going to talk about how Ohio State can attack that defense and what the keys are going to be for them on the offensive side of the football. But if you guys are new around here, I would really appreciate it if you like the video and comment down below about any college football topic or any of the topics discussed today. And certainly like the video. It helps the algorithm a ton, like I mentioned, and subscribe if you want more stuff like this. Though I didn't get a video in yesterday, the goal is to, for the most part, be daily over here with rare exceptions. Like I have a busy life. I only have 263 subscribers last check. So it's not like this is a full-time job. I am somebody who does his homework and does it in all the free time that I can get. And part of that free time is we're going to be comprising a video, a Monday special, where we're going to be doing a little bit of a longer video recapping the best moments of the 2024-25 season. We're going to go through 50 moments. I'm super excited to talk about that on Monday as we hit National Championship Monday, and that preview is coming to you on Friday. But today we got some stuff to discuss because there is still a lot going on in the college football world. There's always a lot going on in the college football world. We're going to be here year-round, so make sure you guys stick around for the long haul. Enough chit-chat right there. That's enough self-promo. The last thing I'll say, by the way, go check out my TikTok, especially while you still can. It is my source that I've been getting the most viewership and interaction with, and I would really appreciate it if more people were able to head on over there, at least while the app is still up, and we're hopeful that the app still holds up, but, you know, this is the plan. This is the plan going forward. It's YouTube with or without TikTok. Notre Dame's defensive game plan is going to be something definitely super interesting. If you listen to Marcus Freeman talk at a recent press conference for the national championship game, he was talking about mixing in a multiplicity, doing stuff to confuse the Ohio State offense and to be able to throw them different looks and all of that stuff. But I got to raise a question to Marcus here. When Marcus Freeman is talking about multiplicity within the defense, mixing things up, number one, your ultimate play caller is Al Golden. This isn't a situation where Marcus Freeman, the former defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, has hung on to defensive play calling duties. No, he went out and hired Al Golden for a reason. And he's going to have a certain amount of aggressiveness because that's just the style that Al Golden is. And that's frankly what got them here. So if it got you here, why would you vary from that? Because I would challenge you that your corners, young corners especially, are a lot more comfortable playing man coverage than they would be if you mix in some zone too, and you rely on that. You're not going to be as fine-tuned in zone defense as Michigan was at the end of the year when they had started repping that after the Oregon game. And then when Texas plays Ohio State, that's what their identity's been all year. Jahdae Barron won the Thorpe Award off of being a great zone corner. There are two safeties in the back end, Michael Taft, Andrew Makuba. They're not necessarily better players than Xavier Watts primarily, but they are zone safeties. They are really good in playing quarters coverage and cover three and being able to keep everything in front of them. That is not Notre Dame's identity. So if Notre Dame does this little pivot, just a little pivot that Marcus Freeman suggests, what makes you think that that's going to be successful? Number one, Ohio State just beat that. And number two, they just beat that against one of, if not the best secondary when it comes to zone coverage and good linebackers, David Benda, who had the interception. Prime example of a good linebacker in zone coverage. That is something that also Jack Kaiser and Drake Bowen are not very good at. They are run stoppers. They are sure tacklers, but they are not the flightest of foot. So what is Notre Dame really going to be counting on? It's going to be number 0. It's going to be Xavier Watts. They're going to play man coverage. I'm calling the bluff out there. They can throw anything out in the media about multiplicity and maybe mixing in some zone coverage. That's not what they're going to do. They're going to try to make Leonard Moore and Christian Gray and Jordan Clark. They're going to make all these secondary players comfortable with what they've been doing and what's been a strength for them all year, especially in the college football playoff. That's got them to this point. And this is what Ohio State needs to watch for, because number 0 is a big old eraser. Aiden Schuler's a solid player, but number 0 is that guy. He's been that guy for a couple of years, the ball hawk, the one that's going to be aggressive and make plays. But you could argue, too, that his aggressiveness can allow for big plays as well. So the key for the Ohio State offense is going to be staying one step ahead of that defense and Xavier Watts. And if you can do that, you could pop some big plays on this defense, because nobody's going to be able to look me in the eye. Not even Notre Dame fans could look me in the eye right now and try to tell me that, yeah, we trust Leonard Moore going up on an island with Jeremiah Smith. We trust Christian Gray on an island with Jeremiah Smith or Emeka Egbuka or Carnell Tate. We trust those running backs to be able to defend the Ohio State athletic tight ends and the running backs who have shown to be really good in the throw game. Remember the 75-yard screen pass to Travion Henderson? Yeah, they can do that. In Texas, quite a bit more athletic at linebacker than Notre Dame. As good as Jack Kaiser, this isn't slander. This is just acknowledging strength and weakness. Jack Kaiser and Drake Bowen, those two linebackers that are primarily in the game in nickel sets, which is mostly what I anticipate Notre Dame's going to do, they're going to really be challenged in this game against those Ohio State running backs. And if they play zone coverage, that challenge elevates because you're going up against NFL receivers in Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, and Jeremiah Smith. You don't want that challenge to elevate, so you would rather stick that responsibility on them. You'd rather roll a safety, try to get Jordan Clark or Aiden Schuler on one of those guys. I think that the big thing that you got to watch for in this game with the Chip Kelly offense is the way that they're going to be able to create matchups on the perimeter, and primarily featuring Jeremiah Smith. 1 catch for 3 yards. Nobody's really upset about that because of all the attention that Jeremiah Smith drew. But is Notre Dame really going to apply the same amount of attention over to Jeremiah Smith that Texas did? Is Notre Dame going to play as soft and conservative as Texas did? If they do, that's against their identity, and they're not going to be nearly as good as the Texas Longhorns were at that. Not to mention this, too. The run game. I saw Penn State, whose offensive line has been playing better in the later stretch of the season. They were able to push around Oregon and run the ball on Oregon. They were able to run the ball in the college football playoff against SMU and Boise State before the Notre Dame game. So it's not like Penn State could not run the football. But with that being said, we watched the game. It was Penn State's offensive line winning against that defensive front at Notre Dame. And wouldn't you say Ohio State's offensive line is somewhat comparable the way they've been playing in the college football playoff to Penn State? Penn State could get a push. I don't see why Ohio State couldn't. So if Ohio State can get that throw game going early, the same way they did against Tennessee, because to me, this defense for Notre Dame might be a little bit more solid in man coverage. But with that being said, the talk about Tennessee's defense was the same amount of talk that you got from Notre Dame, or you get from Notre Dame's defense ahead of this championship game. Except to be honest with you, that number one corner that Jeremiah Smith burnt, Jamad McCoy, better than a true freshman, Leonard Moore, who has played pretty good in college football playoff, Christian Gray, who has played pretty good in the college football playoff. They're not nearly as established and as good as Jamad McCoy was. And yet Jeremiah Smith was beating him one-on-one. So you got to pick your poison with this Ohio State team. And to be honest with you, the poison is likely going to be Jeremiah Smith. Because if you're Notre Dame, you got to stick with the comfort that you have, and that is man coverage. And I guess that means you got to hope and pray that those corners can hold up against number 4 in the scarlet and gray. That's the big story that I'm going with in this game. That's the big talking point that you're going to have. I think Ohio State's going to be able to establish the run game. But I am also pretty sure that Notre Dame is going to play a lot of man coverage just like they always do. And Ohio State is going to have the matchups they like on the outside. Shift gears to the former opponent, and we want to touch on this briefly before we get into the main topic of this show. The opponent of Notre Dame in the semifinal, a common opponent between the two, Penn State. The Penn State Nittany Lions wide receiver room has fallen apart more than even when we had talked in the past, when we had talked 2 days ago. Ever since then, their top 2 receivers, Trey Wallace and Amari Evans, has hit the portal. How much of the blame for what happened there goes on those receivers? Quite a bit, right? They couldn't get separation. They couldn't get open. To Notre Dame's credit, the strength that we just talked about, the man-to-man coverage, man, they had those guys clamped up. And without getting back into that game, the real question that I'm going to have is with Amari Evans and Trey Wallace leaving, this is almost setting a pattern with Drew Allar at quarterback. Drew Allar, in these big games, sure, it's fine what you can do against Maryland and Minnesota and Washington. But in these big games, last year, Michigan and Ohio State, this year, Ohio State and Notre Dame, against these better defenses, albeit he was very sharp against Oregon, Drew Allar has just not shown up against the best defenses that he's played in the last couple of years. The reason why I think that this could all stem back to Drew Allar is multiple things. Number one, these wide receivers could feel a certain type of way about how things are going at Penn State because of the fact that Drew Allar might be a bigger problem than we're willing to acknowledge, and these wide receivers see it, and they're willing to walk out the door. Do you really, really believe that Penn State wanted to see Trey Wallace walk out the door? What's their replacement plan? Devontae Ross, a group of 5 receiver that had a few hundred yards, was pretty productive, especially with the problems in the switcheroo that they had down there at Troy with the quarterback position. But, I mean, come on over here. We saw this, what was it, a year ago or 2 years ago with Dante Cephas? Came in from Kent State, didn't do anything, despite being somebody that people were pretty hyped about in the offseason around Penn State circles. They added Julian Fleming in the portal. Is he going to be the same as Kyron Hudson? I think Kyron Hudson's a better player than Julian Fleming. But how is that going to fit in? Because, see, the problem I have here is that this is not the first time that the top receiver from Penn State has left. And I'm talking wide receivers, not pass catchers, but the top wide receiver from the 23 season was Keandre Lambert-Smith. And he would rather go play in the SEC with Peyton Thorne than stick around at Penn State and be with Drew Allar. Is Drew Allar in big games the real problem? And the other thing that I just cannot get out of my head is James Franklin's specialty is supposed to be the wide receiver room. And he had a nice run there. I mean, he had guys like Jawan Johnson, and he had Chris Godwin there, and he had Jahan Dotson, and he had KJ Hamler. He had all these guys. But the last few years has been a big problem. But the thing to me is they had that guy. He might not have been as good as some of those guys, but like Keandre Lambert-Smith was just as good of a college player as KJ Hamler, and he walked right out the door. Walked right out the door. We see you get a blue chip player from Ohio State's backyard in Caden Saunders. Where has he been? He scored a garbage time touchdown against Ohio State a year ago. Whoop-de-doo. This development is a problem, and the development of the quarterback might be a problem too. And in these big games, Drew Allar has not shown up, and maybe these wide receivers see that. And maybe these wide receivers are sick and tired of taking the blame for all of these big games. They fall short when really, in all reality, it could potentially be in part because of the quarterback. I don't have the privilege to always be able to break down all 22 film. But I promise you, if I did, I would find the answer right there. And if you know the answer, you tell me. But to me, I have seen Drew Allar come up short time and time again, to where now the challenge seems almost steeper. You're going to be counting on the transfer portal to try to be your saving grace at the wide receiver position for your quarterback, Drew Allar. When you did have a productive receiver in the SEC, you had a productive receiver on your team there with Drew Allar in his first year starting, Keandre Lambert-Smith. And he said, I'm out. I don't trust what's going on here. I'd rather go and play at a mid SEC school with one of the worst quarterback situations in that conference. That's a reality check for you Nittany Lion fans out there, and maybe that's something you got to reflect on. I don't know. What I do know, that's supposed to be James Franklin's specialty. James Franklin's got to figure out how to fix it. He had it good at one point. He's got to get it good again. Finally, we're going to talk about this Georgia offense. What is this Georgia offense going to look like in the 2025 season? We weren't really counting on the fact that Carson Beck was going to come back to Georgia, but we were counting on the fact that if he was going to come back to college, he was coming back to Georgia. And then there was a brief moment where Carson Beck had said he was coming back to Georgia. And here's the thing about Carson Beck, too, is I do have a little bit of concern based on the type of injury that he had. Throwing arm, torn UCL, that type of injury is hard to come back from. Hard to come back from. No doubt about it. But let's say he gets back to 100%. The system fit down at Miami is almost perfect. In fact, I think Shannon Dawson is going to be a little bit more comfortable with a guy like Carson Beck at the quarterback position than Cam Ward. They have a lot of the same tendencies. They're always looking for the big plays. Sometimes they don't just take the check down. They decide to try to fit it into some tight windows. And Cam Ward does a good job of just trying to extend plays instead of forcing plays. That's the difference between the two. But if you can refine Carson Beck's decision-making, make him a more polished passer and making just better decisions and not having those turnovers because you're throwing it into tight windows that are just not there, Carson Beck's not going to have the wide receiving core next year at Miami that had the most drops from a Power 4 school. That's why it's a much better fit for Carson. Part of the reason. And then Shannon Dawson is a much better marriage for Carson Beck than Mike Bobo. So who's going to start at quarterback for Georgia? If you're a Georgia fan out there, you're looking in the portal and you're like, keep swinging and missing. You know, specifically with Fernando Mendoza, we wanted him and Indiana somehow got him. Maybe things fell apart on the Georgia end. Maybe Fernando Mendoza is chasing the bread. Maybe he just is bought into whatever Kurt Signetti was selling him. But what I do know is this. Georgia's plan going forward, if it's Gunnar Stockton, their offensive identity needs to be able to change. It needs to look more like the second half of the SEC championship. Maybe you get the development of Ryan Puglisi. He is a kid, as a matter of fact, who did stick around, committed in that class, despite Dylan Raiola being committed over him. The thing about the Georgia offense right now is you don't have a proven passer, and that's what Mike Bobo relies on. Look back at his history. Look back at the offenses that were the most successful, what parlayed him into a head coaching job over at Colorado State. And I don't want to shame him too much for what happened over at Colorado State. He was dealing with a bunch of personal stuff going on. He had health issues, and then it really fell apart at the end after he got healthy, and then he ended up back in the SEC as a coordinator, moving around South Carolina and Auburn, working with Bo Nix, being an analyst for Georgia under Todd Monken. You would think would have helped him out a little bit. But at the end of the day, the last time we saw him in Georgia, the last tenure he had back in 2014, towards the end of his tenure, he was reliant on Aaron Murray being the top passer in Georgia football history. He was reliant on an NFL arm prior to that, and Matthew Stafford being really good for him. He is not going to be able to lean on a player like Gunnar Stockton unless he pivots or Georgia pivots away from him. That is not who Mike Bobo is. So for all you Georgia fans that are out there and you're like, we won 2 national championships with Stetson Bennett. Brother, that's not with Mike Bobo. That was with Todd Monken. Todd Monken's one of the best coordinators in the NFL right now. He's cooking with Baltimore, albeit he's driving a Lamborghini, especially in that run game, but he knows how to manage an offense. Mike Bobo knows how to manage a pass game. But something uncharacteristic with Kirby Smart ran teams, even beyond Kirby Smart, with Mark Richt, they reverted back to being over-reliant on the pass game. The same way that they were over-reliant on the pass game with Aaron Murray. That was the big hold up for the Georgia Bulldogs back then, and it's the big hold up for the Georgia Bulldogs now. What Georgia and Mike Bobo need to be able to do is reestablish dominance on the offensive line. Have that feature tailback that you can have confidence in. I don't know what the solution is at tailback, but what I do know is none of these guys are as productive as they should be, given how talented in the pedigree that these kids had coming out of high school. Yet they're too talented. Never mind out of high school. What we've seen on tape. I saw Trevor Etienne at Florida. I saw Branson Robinson. I saw before him Dijon Edwards. I saw Cash Jones. They all have had flashes and moments. It's a similar problem to what their SEC rival Alabama has had for a couple of years now, where you hire these quarterback passing game, like not necessarily gurus, but almost addicts. That might be the right word to say. Tommy Reese, a former quarterback. Bill O'Brien, always having a productive pass game. Kalen DeBoer in that offense with Nick Sheridan, his little buddy. That's what they do. They throw the ball around the yard. Mike Bobo is one and the same. Mike Bobo is to Georgia what has been at Alabama for a couple of years. I think Kalen DeBoer should pivot. That's a conversation for another time because our focus is on Georgia. Because Georgia, even when they weren't at their top peak, they had a Todd Gurley. They always had a Nick Chubb and Sony Michel and DeAndre Swift. And even if it was a running back by committee thing with Kendall Milton, Kenny McIntosh, and all those guys, James Cook, it's not working. The run game has not been working for Georgia. And for Georgia to have success, they need to go back to their roots. And if that means Kirby needs to make a move, Kirby needs to make a move. Time's ticking for you, though, Kirby. If you're going to stick with Mike Bobo, and the best option for you is going to be Gunnar Stockton, assuming that Ryan Puglisi is not ready, I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned about the Georgia offense in 2025. And you Georgia fans should be too. Because they're going to have a really good defense again. It's a Kirby Smart defense who has NFL players littered all over it. And Kirby Smart in those defenses through the years, and it doesn't matter who's been their coordinator, they have been able to rotate younger guys in, get them exposure, and make them great as young players. You saw it with Michael Williams and Malachi Starks, who were two of the primary players on this past year's team. You saw it with guys like Jalen Carter. They played young. The defense is always going to be good because of how well Kirby Smart does that. The defense is going to keep Georgia in games next year, but will the offense be able to take them over the top? Because I'll tell you, that offense was the reason, the sole reason why they aren't playing on Monday. The wide receiver room wasn't good enough. And to be quite honest with you, once Gunnar Stockton came in, Mike Bobo didn't adjust well enough. I don't know. For all you Georgia fans out there, the pressure is on Kirby. You either got to get Mike Bobo out the door, or you got to sit him down and make him adjust his ways. I'm not saying that everything Mike Bobo does in the throw game doesn't work. I think it does work. I think there's a reason why Carson Beck was really productive through 2 years at Georgia, because I think what Mike Bobo does just works in the throw game. But that's not Georgia's identity right now. And that's not going to be Georgia's identity if Gunnar Stockton is their answer. And there is no proof that anybody else that Georgia's going to get or has currently on the roster is going to be a better solution. That'll do it for this show. Thank you guys for tuning in. Really appreciate you. Like I said in the beginning of the video, make sure you like and comment down below your thoughts on everything I had to say here and any other college football stuff that you might want talked about. With that being said, I'll see you guys tomorrow. We'll be back tomorrow with another video. Have yourself a good night or a good day if you are seeing this on Thursday. I'll see you guys